Hello and welcome to another episode of Two Guys and a Chainsaw. I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
And today we picked the movie. Well, I picked the movie. It's a film that I saw a long time ago, but I just don't remember much about it now that I've seen it again. It's called Night of the Creeps, made in 1986. And it was really made as a send-up to sci-fi and horror B-movies of the bygone era. And that's exactly what it is. Wouldn't you agree, Craig?
Yeah, and that's really more your expertise. I feel like you are more a fan of those movies than I am, but you definitely, or I at least definitely caught a lot of references to those old movies, and so even I, who am not a big, huge fan of those films, caught some of those things.
So whereas like a lot of horror comedy today looks back on more recent horror and makes fun of it, this looks back on like the horror of the 50s and stuff. So I guess you felt a little out of your element watching this?
A little bit. I don't know. The funny thing is I thought that I had seen this movie before. But I was thinking of Night of the Comet, which is a totally different movie. And yeah, I thought I had seen it, and then I popped it in and started watching and realized that this was my first time having ever seen this movie. So I may not be as knowledgeable about this. Usually the movies that we've talked about, I've usually seen 2 or 3 times.
Well, now the writer-director of this movie, Fred Dekker, you must be a big fan of his. He did The Monster Squad.
Oh, I wondered. That's really funny because it seemed like there were a couple lines, and I won't even be able to. No, I know there was one specifically. It's basically a zombie movie, and there's one point where the cop says,
"Corpses that have been dead for 27 years do not get up and go for a walk by themselves."
Which was almost identical to a line in The Monster Squad where the cop dad says the exact same thing about the mummy. And so I didn't realize that there was that connection, but it makes sense because there are some pretty striking similarities.
Well, the movie was obviously written, and intentionally so, by the director, to just, he basically tried to compress every single horror or sci-fi B-movie cliche he could think of into this movie. So it starts out in the 1950s, and it's even in black and white. In fact, he wanted to do the whole movie in black and white. I think it works better this way, where like the past is black and white, and then we come up to 1986.
Right.
A lot of things kind of happen at once. We see a sorority house and some girls in there who are talking about going out on their dates, and then a girl and a guy go out driving, basically parking on the point above the city like they're going to make out, when over the stereo of the car, over the car radio, comes an announcement that there's an escaped maniac on the loose from a local mental asylum. Oh, and even before this, before we even get to Earth, we're up in space.
Yeah. Oh, man, that's so funny. That opening, I had no idea what to expect, and it opens up in, like, this spaceship. It looks like a hallway straight off of the Alien set or something, but then you've got these little naked aliens running around, clearly little people in like rubber suits running around, and it's like one of them is holding some kind of like canister or something, and the other ones are chasing him, and then the one with the canister like launches the canister off into space, and then that's when we jump into the 1959 flashback or whatever. And what's funny is, all I knew about the movie was the very brief synopsis that I read on IMDb, which is like a college prank goes wrong and people turn into zombies or something like that. So I didn't really have any idea what was going on. And when it jumped into that 1959 flashback, I was thinking, oh, okay, this is probably, a movie within a movie. We're probably seeing, something that our main character is going to be watching at a drive-in or something. And then it went on for like 10 minutes or so, and I'm like, wait, maybe I should be paying closer attention. Maybe this is actually important. And as it turns out, it was quasi-important, I guess. I mean, it's connected to the main plot.
Yeah, it kind of sets up the whole deal. They go out parking. This thing comes across the radio. They're driving back. Oh, and she says something about wishing on the brightest star. And pretty soon, this really bright, looks like a shooting star, comes across the sky, which of course is whatever was in this canister from the spaceship.
Right.
And it shoots way across them as a giant fireball and hits the ground in the forest behind them, and so they decide to drive over and check it out. I think he says something like, well, that's about as bright a star as I can find.
Yeah. Meanwhile, on the radio, it keeps busting in with, now another news update about the escaped maniac, and it gives an address, and the girl in the car, I think her name was Pam or something, looks up, and they're parked right underneath the street sign where it says the maniac is going to be, but the boyfriend has gone off to check out the comet, and so then we see, these feet walking towards her. It's apparently the escaped maniac. I mean, it's so many things. It's in the first 10 minutes, you've got aliens, you've got an escaped maniac, you've got all. I had no idea what was going on, and I kind of felt that way through the whole movie.
Throughout. A little bit of grease in there.
Right.
It felt like the Blob too when he's going to the crater, as it's
right.
And there's a canister there, and something leaps up. We're not really clear what's happening to him, but then as it turns out, the girl is getting there's this great long shot of the girl sitting in the car, looking everywhere but where she should be looking, which is behind her, as this guy very easily and slowly walks up behind her, raises the axe, and swings it, and just as he's about to connect with her neck, we jump right back into present day, 1986, the same university. So they were parked just in the area of a university called Corman University, which is one of many references in this film, blatant references to horror movie or sci-fi B-movie directors. It's crazy.
Yeah, I missed that. Because I kept looking for what Corman, is that what you said? Corman University?
Corman, yeah.
Yeah,
Corman
I kept looking for that because it's Roger Corman, right, who did all those old B movies. I was looking for those references because I caught a couple of them, but I missed that one. It makes perfect sense, and it's funny, the tone of the movie. I guess, I mean, you'd have to call it horror for what it is, but there's definitely comedy too. When the two kids, Pam and Johnny or whatever, are parking, and then he goes off to find the comet. She's calling to him like, please come back now, and she says something like,
Johnny, can we go back to the point now? I'll even let you fondle my breast.
just goofball stuff, and not knowing what I was getting into. I mean, even there in the first 10 minutes, I'm like, okay, all right, I feel like I know where this is going.
Did you like, I'm thinking back to the spaceship, how the aliens were running around in the spaceship, and they were talking to each other in some alien language, and it was subtitled, but it was also subtitled in that alien language, so you couldn't read it anyway.
Hilarious.
Like, what was that all about?
Yeah, I loved it. And, the aliens were so goofy looking, like, they were in these, I guess, just, like, rubber prosthetic suits, like, their faces didn't move or anything. Like, even when they're talking, their mouths aren't moving very much. It's pretty funny stuff. And, yeah, it certainly calls back to those B-movies of the 50s and beyond.
Well, there's never a dull moment, though, right? I mean, it really kind of takes off and keeps moving. I don't think that we get a lot of deep conversation between any of the characters or any really strong deep character development.
No.
It all moves along at a pretty steady clip, like those B movies used to do.
Right, right.
Where it's Pledge Week at Corman University, and we're back at the same sorority house, Lambda Delta Iota, I think it was.
I don't know, but we're in 1986, which would have been present day for them.
And we have this moment where we have our two main characters, JC, who we later learn is James Carpenter Hooper.
Oh gosh, see, man, I've only seen the movie once. I didn't catch all these things. I'm glad you caught them.
Well, the detective at one point actually sits him down and he goes, "So, James Carpenter Cooper and Christopher Romero."
That's hilarious. Yeah, you've got these two guys. When it opens up, it's Pledge Week, and these two kind of geekier guys, I guess, JC and Chris. Chris, I recognized right away, and it took me forever, and I finally had to cheat and just get on my phone and look on IMDb. But the actor who plays Chris is named Jason Lively, who is the brother of Robin Lively, who was a really pretty hot actress of the 80s. She was in Teen Witch, which I'm not ashamed to admit was one of our favorites, me and my sister, when I was a kid. And Blake Lively is also his half-sister, and she's hot right now. Isn't she... Who is she? She's the one that's married to Ryan Reynolds. Is that right? I think?
Oh, you might be right.
Yeah, and I think she's in The Shallows right now. Stars in The Shallows. They come from this, I guess, pretty famous family. He was Rusty from European Vacation, which is what I recognized him from. But we meet these two guys, these geeky guys, and they're kind of, I guess, at Rush Week or whatever. And right away, Chris sees this girl, and I feel like there's this, cheesy music cue, like, here's the hot angel girl, and her name is Cynthia, and when she gets fully introduced, her full name is Cynthia Cronenberg, which is another great reference there.
Yeah, and we were just talking last week in The Lost Boys of the cheesy 80s moment where the guy sees the girl through a crowd across, and like the whole world stops and the music cuts in. And this was like every single one of those, like, distilled.
Yeah.
It couldn't have been more overdone and over the top.
Right.
And hilarious, I thought. And at first you watch the movie and you wonder if this is unintentionally hilarious, Mm-hmm. But there's just so much of it.
Yeah.
And again, admittedly, the director said, I wrote every cliche I could think of into here, so they were clearly playing it way up like that.
Right.
And JC is in crutches, so he has, it's never really explained what, but obviously something from childhood,
right,
where he is not able to walk. So he knows he's never going to be the guy who can get the girl. At least that's what he says.
Right.
That might be a little un-PC to say now,
sure,
and not even really ever true. But anyway, that's what he says, and then so he decides he's going to be the one to help Chris get the girl.
Yeah, and so he, Chris sees this girl, Cynthia, and she is beautiful. I don't know this actress. She looked somewhat familiar. I didn't really look her up, Jill Whitlow, but this beautiful brunette girl, and JC kind of goes over to play wingman with her and gets her name and kind of says, look at that good-looking guy over there, and things don't really amp up any more than that at that point, but there's a connection established at least, and of course then later on they all come back together.
Yeah, they follow her into what's now we're like at a fraternity house, I guess.
Right.
And he meets up with her thanks to the prodding, basically, of JC, who kind of... JC's this guy, he's the same guy that are in all these movies where he's like the sidekick to the main character who has all these like witty sayings and who's the one who goads and prods who kind of has the balls,
right,
whereas the main character doesn't. And all of his dialogue is really, really pretty witty and cool and fresh, even though he's kind of a dork. And it's a shame because I feel like the acting is so bad. I mean, did you feel that way?
Yeah, I did, but...
Or was it the writing?
No, I have to say, I was wondering when I would have the opportunity to say this. I enjoyed this movie. It was a fun ride to watch, but... And now that you say that the writer wanted to throw in absolutely every cliche that he could, that kind of makes more sense. But I just kind of felt like the writing was just kind of all over the place. I was like, there were several times when I thought, wait a minute, what is happening? I don't even understand what is happening. I even had to rewind on a couple occasions to make sure I didn't miss anything. And I didn't miss much. It's just they were kind of... I guess, Dekker was kind of playing it fast and loose with the scripting, but it was still a fun ride.
I mean, it does go all over the place because it becomes this again, this cheesy, which is maybe a little more in place in like the 80s, like Revenge of the Nerds, where this guy realizes that to get the girl, he's probably going to have to join a fraternity.
Right.
Because she's hanging out with the frat guys and seems to be involved with one of them. And his name was...
Brad. Yeah. and I recognize that guy too. I don't have his name written down, but he was from Mama's Family. He was the young kind of stud from Mama's Family, which I thought was pretty funny.
You're right. Alan Kaiser.
Nice.
Alan Kaiser.
Yeah, Brad. And Brad is
family.
the head of the betas. I guess they're the hot fraternity on campus, and that's who Cynthia. They call her Cindy sometimes, Cynthia or Cindy. That's her boyfriend. But he's your typical, stereotypical kind of jerky frat guy. And what happens, I guess, is when JC and Chris decide that they need to join the fraternity so that Chris can impress Cynthia. They get up, they meet with the fraternity brothers, and the frat guys tell them, well, oh yeah, we'd be happy to let you pledge, but you just have to do something to prove yourselves first. And Chris says, we don't have to have sex with a farm animal, do we? And Brad's like, oh no, here's what you got to do. And if I remember correctly, we don't really hear what they're challenged to do, but what it turns out to be is they have told Chris and JC they need to go steal a corpse from the on-campus morgue, I guess, and dump it on the lawn of the rival fraternity. Of course, once JC and Chris leave to go set out on their mission, the frat guys, elbow each other, ha ha, hardy har, we're never going to really let these guys in. But that's kind of what kicks everything into motion, is this challenge.
That's right. And so they go, and we get this little bit, which is also totally corny, of the lab worker, I guess, in this specific security locked room area of the morgue, who's forgotten the last digit of his passcode. So I guess he sticks his card in and he starts punching in a code but doesn't get all the way through it, and then goes to the payphone around the corner to call somebody and is like, yeah, it's like in my notebook. No, not the red one, the blue one. just on the phone forever, trying to get this last number while these guys walk down. And then JC just sees this door on the hallway and just absentmindedly just punches one of the buttons for fun, and it happens apparently to be the last digit of the passcode. Right. The door opens like, whoa, check it out, let's go inside.
Yeah, and they go in and it's totally, I don't even know what you would call it, like the scientist's room from one of those old B movies, just lots of flashing lights, and and then there's this big cryo chamber with a guy standing in there. We, the viewers, I think can figure out pretty quickly that the guy that's there in the cryo chamber is Johnny, the guy from the flashback from the 1950s, and he's frozen in there. And all that we really saw that happened to him was, he found that canister, and then some kind of slug-like creature jumped into his mouth. And that's all we saw. But, they kind of, JC and Chris kind of debate, what should we do, but they eventually, I think JC just pushes a great big button, a great big red button that says disengage or something like that. And he pushes it, and the cryo chamber opens up, and they grab the body, and they start pulling it out, and I don't know what they were thinking, how they were going to get this body out of there without anybody noticing, but as it turns out, it doesn't really matter because the body twitches, it moves, and it freaks them out, and they run away. They then, of course, have no idea what happens after they're gone.
Yeah, and at that point, the scientist guy, trips over them. He's like, "Hey, what?" And this guy's David Paymer. I mean, he's somebody you probably don't know his name, but you've seen him in every other movie.
Right, yeah.
He's on TV a ton. He's in a lot of big movies. He's in Amistad and Quiz Show and Payback and Drag Me to Hell and guested on Law and Order. And I mean, almost every TV series he's had a part in somewhere.
Oh yeah, lots of good cameos in the movie.
Then, of course, this slug thing pops out of this corpse, this somewhat animated corpse, and jumps into his mouth. And that's how this entity, which is a bunch of slugs, it's like alien slugs that are reanimating, basically killing their hosts or getting into the brain of their hosts, and then killing them, but then keeping them alive enough that they can be zombies and controlled by the slug.
Yeah, and that was one of the funny things that I really couldn't figure out. Like, I never really understood what the purpose of these things were. I mean, like, there are these slugs that I guess, go into the host, the human being, and like intubate in their brain, and then after a while they bust out, and it's more slugs, and they scurry off all over, whatever. But I never really understood what the end game was. Like,
yeah, that's true.
Like, I guess they just wanted to make more slugs, like and when the people are zombies controlled by these slugs or whatever, just the host for these slugs, like, they didn't even seem particularly malicious or anything. Like, they just kind of walked around. Like, their only purpose was to kind of walk around and maybe shoot another slug out of their mouth into somebody else's mouth, or eventually what happens to them is their head like busts open and a bunch of slugs come out. But I mean, it just kind of seemed like a coincidence that people happened to turn into zombies for a while, and while the slugs were in there, and then the slugs burst out, and then they weren't anymore. Like, I don't know. Yeah, it was weird.
It's hard to imagine how precious these creatures are to these alien beings that they had to save them and jettison them out of their ship. Like,
yeah, I have no idea.
And so then what happens is this reanimated corpse goes... No, the cop's called at that point, right?
Yeah, it's the cop.
The detective.
And his name is Detective Cameron, I think, maybe, something like that.
Yes.
Or Ray. His first name's Ray. And again, being the first time I'd seen the movie, it took me a while to put two and two together, because he gets involved in this investigation with the missing body and stuff, but then he's also having like weird flashbacks to that night in the 50s. And it took me a second to put together when the couple in the 50s had gone parking, a cop had come over to the car to break them up. But when the cop recognized the girl, he was like, "Oh, Pam, it's you." And she was like, "Oh, hi, Ray, what's up?" And as it turns out, this cop, the actor's name is Tom Atkins, a guy that I immediately recognized, but I couldn't even really tell you what from. It's like he always plays this hard-nosed cop character. It turns out that he was the cop in the flashback, and that he had been the one who had, found the axe murderer who had killed Pam. He had been in love with her. Like, it's just such it's so convoluted that it's really difficult to follow. I feel like if I went back and watched it again, I would catch a lot more. But anyway, so now he is on this case, and it's, for whatever reason, reminding him of what had happened to him back in the 50s.
Yeah, he's your stereotypical, I'm haunted by this one thing that happened to me, and he drinks and he smokes. And,
right.
There's one point where he's poring over old photos of the crime scene from the 50s and stuff. Like, I mean, again, every cliche you can imagine.
Well, and the first time that we're introduced to him is, I guess, in a dream sequence. Like, I had no idea what was going on. The first time you see him, he's sitting on a beach in a white suit, and all these gorgeous, bikini-clad girls are like bringing him drinks and stuff, and then this blonde comes up out of the water. It took me several minutes to realize that blonde that comes up out of the water was Pam, the girl that had gotten killed in the 50s, and as it turns out, that had been his first true love, and he had witnessed her demise, and so he's being haunted by those past events, and now he's thrown into this new crisis.
Well, it's impossible to recognize her, too, because that is the 80s teased-up hair Pam, not the 1950s, like, total, short crop. Like she didn't even look like the same girl because her makeup and everything was totally modern. But yeah, he's called out because there's a report of a body at the lab, and it's the body of the lab guy who had stumbled across this happening. And of course, they know that there's another body that's supposed to be there that's not. And that's this corpse of, what was the guy's name again from the 50s?
Johnny.
Johnny.
Yeah, and that's where the line comes, that the body is missing, and he says, guys who've been dead for 27 years don't just get up and walk away on their own. And immediately, and I saw it coming a mile away, immediately then we cut to these, corpse feet, kind of shuffling along the grass outside. And so Johnny's corpse is now on the loose. And Cindy, we jump to Cindy, and she's back at her sorority, where apparently she's the president of her sorority or whatever, and seemingly super randomly, as soon as she walks in the door, one of the sorority sisters says, "Oh, by the way, I was wondering if I could store all these human brains in the basement. we have to dissect them later." And she's like, "Okay, I guess. I just don't want them up here." And I'm like, that is so random. Of course, it comes back
do you think
towards
that's
the end of the movie. But she goes up to her room, and she takes off her top, of course, so we get a flash of her boobs, and people keep, like, the girls, of course, it's all, very cheesy horror. They keep hearing things outside or whatever, and one girl hears something, and it's just the cat. And then,
it's like a total cat scare. It's like this actually has a cat scare where the cat is like at the door. It's not like behind a bush. It's not like in a closet. It's like the door rattles, and she goes to open it, and the cat leaps up about 6 feet at it. It's so hilarious.
Right.
Oh, sorry.
And then Cynthia is up in her bedroom, and she hears the same kind of tapping at her window, and she goes and she opens one window, nothing there. She opens another window, nothing there. But then all of a sudden, popping up from the bottom of the window, from the bottom of our screen, is this corpse. And it just kind of looks at her eerily through the window. And this was the part that I had to rewind, because it happened so fast that I couldn't tell what happened the first time. The second time, when I rewound it, you see I swear, it's like a split second. You see the guy's head start to split open, and then you see these slugs, splatter down on the ground all around him. And then it cuts immediately to the cop getting called, and every time the cop gets called, he picks up the phone and says, "Thrill me." like that's his catchphrase.
He's got his catchphrase
throughout the whole movie. And he's called over to the sorority house, where now there's a body on the ground, right in front of the front door, and when they pull the sheet back, it looks like the head is split straight down the middle, almost like with an axe. But then what confused me was they kept saying that there was a headless corpse out there. Yeah. And they even show a headline on a newspaper, "Headless corpse found in front of sorority house" or whatever. And it wasn't headless. No. It took me I was like, what is going on? I felt certain that I had missed something, but I didn't. I don't know if that was intentional. I don't know if it was just weird editing. I don't know if something got changed and they had to go back and do reshoots, but I'm like, this is confusing to me, because this corpse is not headless. It clearly has a head.
No, you're absolutely right. It is confusing. And I think everything happens so quickly, and there's so many corpses to keep track of.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you have these crossing storylines where the past, your brain's trying to make these connections to why is this happening and who's who. And then the dream sequence, and of course, you figure that the cop is haunted by something. And yeah, it just comes at you too quickly, really, for you to be able to follow it as easily as you want to.
Well, right, and like that when the cop gets there and is doing the investigating or whatever, Cynthia is there and like acting like she's all upset, like Brad's consoling her or whatever, but she doesn't say anything. Like, one would think that had some zombie guy come to your window and then their head had exploded, you might mention that when the cops came to investigate, but I guess apparently she was too distraught. I was totally confused at that point as to what was going on.
Well, and to pile on top of it, then Detective Cameron like saunters through the house and out the back door, and he looks and he stops and he just stares at the back, which you don't even see what it is.
No,
that's the other messed up thing. You don't even see what it is that he's looking at, and somebody comes up from behind him. Just some kid walks by, and he says, "What's that?" Or the cop says something like, "What's that doing there?" or whatever. And
What's
the kid
that
says,
supposed to be?
Yeah, that's the house mother's cottage. And he says, "Oh, like it has some significance."
Right.
And you're like, what? What is this? And show me the cottage at least.
Yeah,
and then
it's really thick. You know, again, I don't want to be too critical because I don't think that this movie was by any stretch of the imagination going for high art, but the plot, the writing is so thin, it does make it kind of hard to follow. I guess, you know, after that, the Brad confronts Chris and JC on campus the next day and says, "That wasn't cool, guys. You know, I know we put you up to that prank or whatever, but you were supposed to drop it on the rival frat's lawn, not on that sorority or whatever." And JC kind of, you know, smart mouths him a little bit and says, "We didn't do it. You know, we started to, but we chickened out. We didn't do it."
But at that point, Brad delivers my absolute favorite line in the whole movie, which is, "A lot of girls were seriously freaked out last night because of you."
Oh, yeah, great stuff.
A lot of girls were seriously freaked out last night because of you guys. Oh, okay, Brad.
Oh, gosh, yeah. And so then Brad, I guess, like, trips JC, like kicks his crutch out from underneath him, which Cynthia witnesses, and like, that's not cool. Like, you know, you don't push down the kid on crutches. And so she's mad at him, and she kind of starts not flirting necessarily, but kind of buddying up with JC and Chris, like they're gonna be buds now, and it's just wild, you know. And then things happen, you know, it's jumpy, like it jumps from scene to scene. I don't even remember exactly what happens, but I feel like when the cop is investigating the dead bodies, the first ones, the ones in the lab, and one of them is missing or something, he says something like, "What is this, a homicide or a bad B movie?" And, you know, with lines like that, you have to, you know, kind of give it some leeway into, all right, you know, they're going for the humor here. They're not going for serious storytelling, so just kind of roll with it.
Oh, yeah, and then the cop, through his investigations, gets to these two guys for reasons that are a little hard to understand, except that I guess they were seen by
the
janitor. And that is almost embarrassing scene there where he's interviewing them, and he tells them, "Oh, well, this some pledge frat prank gone awry," and he delivers another one of those great lines, which is JC says,
"Detective, I mean, we're not your fraternity types. I personally would rather have my brains invaded by creatures from space than pledge a fraternity."
Right. Hilarious.
But what's it?
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say what's so embarrassing about it is he says another line about how you guys ran screaming like a banshee, and this janitor, who is obviously Asian, is playing the stereotypical goofy Asian guy with the broken English, and he goes, "Screaming like banshee." Ha 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 ha.
And he keeps repeating it like it's the funniest thing he's ever heard. It's funny.
Oh my gosh. And then he keeps repeating it the next night when he's out there, I guess, sweeping the halls again, going, "Screaming like banshee, ha 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 ha," and encounters. And this is the part I didn't understand because, it's it's the same morgue, I guess.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. They take him to the university morgue. I guess the university morgue and the police use the same. They're the same place. It's the same morgue. I don't know. It doesn't make sense when you really think about it. But anyway, the body of the lab guy sits up and goes out and then infects the janitor as well.
Right, and that was a really funny scene too, because there are people in, like, there's another scientist in the morgue, and then there's like a security guard, and this naked, bloody corpse just gets up and walks by everybody, and just nobody even notices. Like, they're just not paying any attention. They're like,
the cops
have
like
a good
looking
night,
down
see
at
you
his
tomorrow.
Paper. Yeah. It's fantastic.
Right, and so, yeah, it then infects the janitor, which, again, none of this is really consequential at all. Like, it doesn't really, because all that happens once a person is infected is that they walk around like a zombie for a while until their head explodes and more slugs come out, I guess.
Yes.
And so then Cynthia comes to the guy's dorm, JC and Chris's dorm, and it's kind of cute. You know, Chris is like stammering when he answers the door or whatever, but she asks if they can go for a walk. JC realizes that he's kind of the third wheel, so he says, I got to go to the bathroom, and he goes off to go to the bathroom. And then Cynthia tells Chris, you know, all this stuff that has happened. You know, I saw well, first of all, the cat comes back again, but it's a zombie cat. And again, just out of nowhere, like we're supposed to just think, oh, okay, zombie cat. And so she tells Chris that, and she says,
Chris, if I tell you something, you promise to believe me?
Of course.
I think it was a zombie, and its head exploded, and things like slugs or something spilled out.
Okay. Maybe I should walk you home.
And he does. He walks her home, and at the door they just have kind of like this sweet romantic moment, and she's like, I also wanted to see if you wanted to go to the formal with me tomorrow night. And he's like, okay. She's like, I promise no more weird stuff. Like, it's just
like she's willing to put it all behind her now.
Right. So goofy, but funny.
Yeah. In the meantime, JC's getting infected by slugs. Again, I thought this scene was super convoluted too. He's on the toilet and he's writing. He's actually scrawling. He's one of those guys apparently who scrawls on the wall of the toilet stall
with a pencil. Because if you're gonna do graffiti on a bathroom stall wall, you should definitely do it in pencil. So it's easy. So it's easy, I guess, for the janitorial staff to clean off. I don't know.
Hey, he's not a monster.
No.
So while he's sitting there, the janitor wanders in and he falls down and his head explodes and all these slugs are going around. And JC, I mean, keep in mind, nobody knows about these slugs.
Right.
Like nobody. So he's getting kind of freaked out, and to my mind, it's like a little overly freaked out. He hears a noise, there's no response, and then he hears like some movement.
Like squishing, yeah. Mm-hmm.
There's no reason to believe he's in mortal danger of anything, but that's kind of how he acts.
Right.
And there's a matchbook just sort of sitting on the floor. Did it fall from the
I have no idea.
Janitor?
Well, he cracks the door of his stall, and he sees the janitor's head exploded, and he sees these slugs squirming around or whatever. So then he's kind of freaked out. But you're right. Then, like, right underneath his stall door is this matchbook. I never saw him drop it. I have no idea why it was there, and I had no idea why he wanted it. I'm like, he's reaching for it. The slugs are racing around, scaring him, and I'm like, what is he going to do with these matches? I'm thinking, is he going to, like, light the toilet paper on fire? Is he going to, like, try to start the fire alarm?
I thought he was trying to start the fire alarm. That's what I thought. And it turns out he lights it, and then he just, like, burns the whole book up and holds it down on the floor, like, I guess in hopes that a slug would run into it, which it does.
Which it does, right. and like
Doesn't make
erupts
any
in
sense.
flames.
Yes, and
right.
sort of dissolves.
So now, obviously, we know that fire kills these things.
Which is so funny because fire kills pretty much everything.
Yeah.
It's not like a big special weakness, you know?
Right. And so you know, he like you said before, he has some sort of disability, so he can't walk. So he propels himself off the toilet and is trying to get to the door, and the slugs are all around him, and you see one coming straight for him, and then it cuts away. And then I feel like more stuff happens. I don't even remember. At this point, I was getting so confused as to what was going on. I think that there's another... Well, it turns out the cop had been following Chris and Cynthia, and so he heard Cynthia's story, and so he takes Chris back to the interrogation room or whatever. And
I think it's his house.
Is it his house? Yeah, I don't remember.
I think it's his house.
And
if it's not, it has a sofa and a desk, and it's all.
Maybe it was his house. I don't know. I was so lost. But out of nowhere, for no reason, seemingly, the cop tells Chris, "Yeah, I had a first love too," and he tells this story about how he had found. The two people from the 50s, the couple from the 50s, he had found them all dead and chopped up or whatever, or the girl at least was chopped up, and he said, you know, I found that maniac and I took my 12-gauge shotgun and I unloaded it right into his chest, and then I wrapped him up in plastic and buried him in an empty lot. But it's not an empty lot anymore. Now it's where the sorority house mother's cottage is. And Chris even says something like,
Look, Detective, now I don't mean to be rude or anything, but other than just kind of wanting to confess to a murder, is there a point to this story?
Spanky. That's exactly what I'm trying to figure out.
like, what? I have no idea what is going on.
I think honestly, that was a conscious effort on the writer's part to poke fun at it. He said, I'm going to write this goofy scene. I'm going to write it so cliche and goofy, and then I'm going to call attention to the fact that this is goofy and cliche. Because he's even like, because I got like a test tomorrow. Yeah. And of course, the next scene is this corpse of the axe murderer breaking through the floorboards of the house mother's cottage. Again, another classic cliche of the old lady watching TV late at night with her cat, the cat lady,
right?
Who suddenly is one of the people to meet her demise.
Yeah, well, normally I would just let that go, but it's kind of significant later. She actually has a dog. We've already seen the zombie cat.
Oh, that's right.
So she's got a dog, and which
also gets zombified.
Right, which also gets zombified. And again, I totally get what you're saying when he said he wanted to throw in every little thing that he could, and I really felt like. I thought that was the case as I was watching it, because not only is this corpse of the axe murderer now zombified, but this was also a 27-year-old corpse, so it's a skeleton zombie. So now you've got a walking skeleton zombie walking around, and again, the cops somehow immediately discover that this house mother has been murdered. They immediately go on the investigation, and they immediately find the skeleton zombie. And our main cop, Ray, is there, and he's got his 12-gauge, and he shoots the zombie again, and the head explodes, and the slugs come out again. It's just so many random things all thrown together.
Yes, but it's also formal night,
right?
and so we're getting the montage shots of everybody getting ready for the formal.
Classic.
Again, more girls showering, guys putting on their tuxes and everything like that. And of course, Brad, right, is not going to the formal with her, and all the guys are heading onto a bus, I guess.
Yeah, like a party bus or whatever.
Some distance away, and they're all heading onto a party bus, and one of the guys says, "Hey, where's Brad? Have you seen him?" He's like, "No, man, he like totally got ditched, so I think he's checking out on this one." Of course, Brad is stumbling around drunk, and he goes to the sorority house, and he throws a bottle at it, and he's mad, and it looks like he's going to confront her, but then he hears some rustling in the bushes.
Right.
And he bends down, and he looks, and the dog comes up. The zombie dog comes up to him, and he's, again, not looking at the dog, but he says, "Hey, dog, did you see that thing?"
And then, right, it's hilarious. And then we get to see the dog, and it's clearly, some kind of puppet or animatronic, and it shoots one of the slugs out of its mouth into Brad's mouth, which is funny. Sometimes these slugs just get to people on their own, but just as often, one of the zombies will shoot one out of their mouth.
Yeah, their head doesn't have to explode necessarily.
Hilarious. And we cut back to the party bus, and they're all partying or whatever, and the driver is watching the road, and then Zombie Dog is in the road, so he swerves to avoid hitting Zombie Dog, and they get in this terrible crash where presumably all the frat guys are dead, and then Zombie Dog crawls into the wreckage, and obviously we know that we're getting set up for all these frat guys to now be zombies too.
Which I think is where the title of the movie comes from, Night of the Creeps.
Night of the Creeps, right.
It's the creeps that end up breaking out, the creepy college frat guys.
Right.
Who end up... And so then it becomes your classic zombie invasion, where they all end up at the sorority house. The policeman has the cop has beat his way there. Brad has gone there because he's taking her out to the formal. But before he gets there... Chris,
you're talking about, right? Chris, the main guy.
Chris. But before Chris gets there, zombie Brad rings the doorbell first. and one of the girls opens it and says, "Oh, Cindy, it's Brad." And just walks away. And he's just standing there. So Cindy comes down, again, another one of these people who doesn't notice that there's something seriously wrong with Brad.
Right, it's funny. It's like the actress, the direction was clearly, make sure you don't look at him. Like, she's just kind of like looking at his feet, or looking at her feet, and she kind of walks by and grabs his arm and sits him down on the stoop and is like, "I'm really sorry, I was going to call you." One thing we left out during that montage, during the getting ready montage, again, here is another thing that, again, just made no sense to me. When Chris is getting ready in his room, he finds a tape recorder that just has a note pasted to it or whatever that says "play me," and he plays it, and it's Zombie JC saying something infected me and it got in my brain, and like on the recording, Zombie JC explains what's going on. Like, they get in your brain and they intubate there, and you can still walk around, but you can kill them with fire. Like, it was the most cliched explanation. Like, it just seemed like it came out of nowhere. JC is the only zombie who we have ever seen talk. He's the only one that we've ever seen, maintain any of his humanity. It really doesn't make, there's no continuity at all with the whole zombie infestation. But anyway, so Chris knows that they have to have fire. So he had gone to the cop, and he explained everything to the cop, and I guess the cop just said, "Oh, okay." And they went to, I guess, like, what, the weapons room or something for the cops?
At first I thought it was, the place where they hold all the evidence, like the evidence room, but it clearly wasn't. It's more like the armory.
Right.
And there's a fantastic cameo here by Dick Miller.
Yes.
Oh, Dick Miller. What a great guy. Best actor in the whole film.
Probably.
Absolutely best actor in the whole film.
Yeah, and I was
hey.
so excited to see him pop up because we've talked about him before.
Yep.
I know him mostly from Gremlins. He's the excellent neighbor from Gremlins, but he popped up in Chopping Mall when we talked about Chopping Mall, and you told me that he was a pretty regular cameo in whose movies?
Roger Corman. Roger Corman used him in almost every movie.
Yeah. So that was a lot of fun. And yeah, he was funny. I mean, he's only in it for maybe a minute, but they get a flamethrower from him because apparently...
I know.
Because apparently flamethrowers are a thing that exists and that cops have in their arsenal.
I know, and he's like so nonchalant about it. He's like, they're just laughing and joking like they're the best of friends in the world. And he's like, oh, I need a flamethrower. It's like, whoa, heavy artillery this time. And he just walks in the back where the flamethrower is sitting there.
Yeah.
Right in his path, like he had just put it aside from, they'd only used it like 10 minutes earlier. Not much call for these, so all I need are the requisition papers. And at this point, his buddy friend says, there's going to be a problem with that. And he cocks a rifle and aims it at him.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess not so friendly anymore.
I guess. Yeah.
But they get the flamethrower anyway.
Yeah, it works.
And while Cynthia is sitting there talking to Zombie Brad, Chris and the cop show up, and Chris says, "Get away from him" or something. And Cynthia looks over and sees that it's the zombie, and Chris uses the flamethrower and takes out Zombie Brad. And that's really where the big showdown begins. And I think it was the movie's tagline. The cop gets in the sorority house and all the sorority girls are in there, and he says something like,
I got good news and bad news, girls. The good news is your dates are here.
What's the bad news?
They're dead.
and then it's zombie showdown at the sorority house.
And I thought that was a pretty good sequence. I don't know about you, but I thought it was pretty fun.
Yeah, sure.
It's hard, honestly, it's hard to get super engaged with a movie like this. Like, you're not on the edge of your seat necessarily hoping these characters are going to live.
Oh, no.
At least I wasn't. It's like I honestly didn't care.
No.
I wasn't sure if the cop was going to make it or not. He kind of gets beset by the zombies after a while, but he goes down kind of in a blaze of glory.
Right.
And you think he's dead. And then the two of them, that's part I thought was really kind of fun, having Cindy and Chris kind of buddying up, she with the flamethrower and he with his gun, kind of taking on the zombies.
Yeah.
A real nice sequence, I thought.
Yeah,
it was entertaining.
It was fun. I mean, it was a suitable ending. That's what you want from this kind of movie. You want there to be, if you've made it all this way through, you at least want there to be a nice, showdown at the end. And it was fun. And you're right. The two of them, Chris and Cindy, Cindy with the flamethrower and Chris with the shotgun, and they're taking out zombies left and right. Of course, these are all frat guy zombies. And the makeup and the effects are kind of cheesy and cornball, but it seems like that's what they were going for. Like, it doesn't seem like they were really going for realism. They were going for kind of B-movie goofy, and Cindy and Chris at one point, like, and again, these are like the slowest, most non-threatening zombies ever. Like they're literally like a foot away from Cindy and Chris are like trying to get into like this little garden shed or something, and the zombies are literally within reach. Like, they could have easily just reached out and grabbed them, but no, they just kind of hang back and let them get in the shed before they attack, and it's funny.
Yeah, and I love that bit where he whips up the lawnmower.
Yeah,
it's like, go back. That was so great. It was actually shades of Dead Alive. Have you ever seen Dead Alive?
A million years ago, but yes.
Oh, okay, yeah, made me think of that. And the notorious lawnmower scene against all the zombies.
Right.
But I don't know about you, but I felt like this movie felt like it had been cut. And I mean, it felt like every time like an effect was happening, it was just a little too short. You know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like an axe would come at somebody's head and maybe it would split just a little bit, but just very unsatisfyingly so.
Yeah, I do know what you mean.
I want to think that maybe if there was a DVD out there that there's an unrated version or non-deleted scenes or something where you can see the actual effects that happened, because it seems like it's all set up for good effects. It's not one of those B-movie, we didn't have the money for special effects, so we're going to cut away before anything happens. That usually cuts away earlier.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas this felt like, oh, things are coming in contact, there's a little blood spurt, or there's a little bit of skin peel or whatever, but then we cut away.
Right, yeah, I felt the same way, and that I think that is what led to some of my confusion. Like I said early on, when Cindy had seen, the very first zombie, and just for a split second, you see its head split open, and maybe the slugs come out. But it really seemed like they had cut it like just a couple of seconds too short, so that I didn't really know what was going on, and I had to rewind. And you kind of get that sense throughout.
Well, there's a really bizarre moment too. I don't know if you caught it, but I actually freeze framed on it because I was like, what? Where the bus, the dog's in the way, and the bus driver's coming towards him, and there's the shot of the bus driver, and he's reacting to the dog, and then there's the shot of the dog, and then there's like a half a second shot of the bus just as it's crashing, and it's of the bus driver, but the bus driver is clearly like a puppet or like a figure.
I noticed that too, and his eyes bulge out.
His eyes are glowing or something, or bulging out, right?
Yeah, I did.
What was that?
I did notice. I have no idea. It was funny.
I want to think there was something cut, like something had happened, but they cut the scene beforehand. But why even have that split-second shot in there in the first place?
Yeah,
it was just long enough to call attention to itself. It was so strange. But you know what? Honestly, no, go ahead.
And that's it. You've got the zombie showdown, and they take out all these zombies or whatever, and then Chris and Cindy see all the slugs going down to the basement, and Chris says, "Why would they all be going to the basement?" And it's like light bulb. I mean, they literally could have done the light bulb effect above Cindy's head, and she's like, "Oh crap!" Because all those brains, yeah. So they figure they're all down there, so they head down there. All of the slugs are congregating down there, but the cop is already down there, and he's like splashing gasoline around, and he basically just tells them to take off, and he starts counting down. And again, it's so cheesy and weird, and I'm like, what is he talking about? He just starts going like, 20, 19, and there's big long pauses between every number. What is happening? But luckily Chris, I guess, has more insight than I do, and he figures out that the guy's counting down. So Chris and Cindy run out. Chris continues the countdown for himself.
But it's the worst countdown in the world because there's such long pauses in there. How can Chris possibly continue it?
Oh God, no. How would he know? I don't know.
And then Chris goes,
yeah,
thrill me.
Thrill me, yeah.
And the house explodes.
Yeah. And then Chris and Cynthia, of course, have their lovely romantic moment at the end, and they kiss in front of the burning house. And in any normal movie, you would figure that was going to be the end. But knowing what kind of movie this was, I knew that there would have to be some sort of tag. We weren't going to get away with just the cutesy, lovey-dovey ending.
Yeah, yep. We see some more feet shuffling far away from the fire, and they pan up, and it turns out to be the charred detective who apparently got brain slugged after the fire, but was in a good enough shape to crawl out of it without anybody noticing and get way down the street toward the cemetery.
Still smoking his cigarette.
Still, that's right. But he falls down and splatters open, and the slugs slide out and go under a gate, and the camera slowly pans up on the gate, and it turns out it's the cemetery.
And I thought that was where it was going to end, because I thought that was pretty clever. I thought that was pretty clever for setting up, kind of a Night of the Living Dead thing. These slugs can infect the corpses, and then it'll be, Night of the Living Dead zombies or whatever. But that's not even it. We've still got more.
Yes. We have suddenly there's like a spotlight that shines down on one of the graves and then moves around a little bit and goes away. And then you see a ship come into frame. The big ship that we saw.
Spaceship.
Like one that would have been noticed from miles away.
Yeah.
Slowly coming in the frame, nobody else around, and it's shining lights down like it's searching. It's searching for the slugs that it lost. Now, granted, 20 years later?
Right.
30 years later?
30 years later.
What? Where does that come from?
I don't know, but it was actually a pretty cool-looking spaceship.
It was. the effect was cool, and the idea was funny and interesting. I guess these slugs might have had tracking devices in them, so once they activated, or once like too many of them like reproduced, that the spaceships could hone back in on where they were. Or maybe it just took them 30 years to finally get to where, that spot on Earth, and they just happened to be there at the right time.
Well, and again, I feel like it's just that idea of just kind of throwing everything in. Like, I thought that, it was really clever. Have the slugs go into the graveyard. That's great. They've got, this whole harvest of bodies they can use. But no, not just that. Don't forget, we've also got aliens.
Don't forget the aliens from the beginning. We have to bookend this thing.
Yeah, good stuff. Good stuff. And that's it.
It is. I think, honestly... The acting is bad, but there are moments where the acting is supposed to be bad. Like the cop. The cop is supposed to be over-the-top cheesy. I felt like the boys were supposed to be the straight characters, and their acting wasn't really very convincing or the best, although it had its moments. And the film itself is very well made.
It is.
As far as
I was
cinematography.
Surprised by that. Yeah.
Yeah. Lots of really creative camera work, real nice swooping in. It's really surprising to me that, honestly, Fred Dekker really hasn't done much else. I mean, he's written a lot. He apparently wrote the screenplay for the Predator movie that's in pre-production now.
Oh, wow.
And he wrote the story for House, and of course he did Monster Squad. He wrote and directed that. He wrote the story for Ricochet, several Tales from the Crypt TV episodes. He did the screenplay for RoboCop 3. Oh, wow. But I mean, almost everything I'm rattling off is like decades ago.
Right.
Right. And the last thing he directed was RoboCop 3.
Huh.
It was Night of the Creeps, Monster Squad, an episode of Tales from the Crypt, and RoboCop 3.
Wow.
Clearly a talented guy, clearly has a heart for this sort of material. He just hasn't put out a lot of it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm a huge fan of the Monster Squad. We've got to talk about that at some point. So I almost wish I had known that going in. I think maybe I would have been more amped up for this movie. But it's different. We watch a lot of older movies and talk about them. I just don't think that this kind of movie would fly anymore. I just don't. I feel like there's not really the market for it. I feel like those cheesy goofball, terrible sci-fi movies have kind of replaced this genre. And I guess in a way it's kind of too bad, because you've got guys like Fred Dekker who really had kind of creative minds and interesting ideas, and now we're just inundated with these thrown together Sharknado 4s and whatever, which have their place, and that's fine, whatever. I'll catch those on Sci-Fi every once in a while, but they just don't seem to have the same kind of heart that this, as goofy and silly as this movie is, you can tell that there's heart behind it. The people making it were they were doing something. They were trying to do something.
Yeah, and whereas the Sharknado movies, they know they're being silly, but at least they're kind of original. And I think what this movie fails at is really being terribly original. And I know that wasn't his point. His point was to throw in all this stuff, every cliche he could think of. But at the end of the day, it really calls into question, is it really that great of an idea? I mean, do we really want to watch that?
True.
I mean, I had fun watching the movie, but I don't really want to see other movies like it.
Yeah, I get what you mean.
It's one thing to, I guess, to throw cliches and things into a movie. Lots of times people then try to subvert those. They throw a cliche in, but then, like Cabin in the Woods does a fantastic job of subverting, all those cliches.
Right.
In my mind, it uses them a little more effectively than this movie does, which just throws them all in, and by that matter of that fact alone, thinks you're going to think it's funny and goofy, which it is, but maybe, to me at least, in maybe all the wrong reasons, for all the wrong reasons.
Again, I feel like, we've done so many episodes now, we keep repeating ourselves, but if I had seen this movie as a kid, as like an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old, I think I would have thought it was pretty awesome. But seeing it now as a nearly 40-year-old, it's a little more eye roll worthy. But I don't know, a decent effort. I didn't feel like I had wasted my time having watched it. It was all right, and I was surprised that I Night of the Creeps. I'd heard that title a million times. I thought I had seen the movie. Watching it this time, I couldn't believe I hadn't seen it. So I'm glad that you picked it.
Yeah, and I think I'm on the same page with you. I feel like for the completist and for the person who loves these movies, you're going to get a kick out of it.
Yeah.
Are you going to walk away from it wanting to watch it again or thinking it's the best movie ever?
Nah.
Probably not.
Nah. Yeah. I can't believe we've gotten... I feel like I have to say before we leave, I can't think of the guy's name who did it, but whoever the guy was who did Slither should be paying...
James Gunn.
Yeah, he should be paying Fred Dekker royalties because the slug monsters are virtually identical to the slugs in this movie.
Oh yeah, James Gunn. Well, it worked out a lot better for James Gunn. He's the guy behind Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yeah,
now, so.
yeah.
Well, thank you again for listening to another episode. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. You can find us on iTunes and Stitcher, and you can find our Facebook page where you can leave a comment, let us know what you liked about this episode, and or suggest some other movies for us to watch.
Yeah, we love hearing from you guys.
Until next week, I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
With two guys and a chainsaw.